Good morning everyone and welcome to Androidizen Live episode 4. On today's episode we'll be taking a look at, well, some new games that have come through, but also a couple of interesting announcements as well, including the new LG G2. So, first off, if you're new to the Androidizen Live show, do have a look in the comments area and leave us a comment. We'll be checking them throughout the show, and if you have any questions, do drop them in, any comments as well. Introducing today as well, just slightly out of shot, is Tinky the cat, who may decide to cause us some problems during the show, but we'll see how she gets on. So, this week has been quite interesting from an Android point of view because we've had a few new handsets pop up. We've had the new Motorola, which everyone kind of just went meh at. And Motorola have attempted to defend the handset, saying, you know, it's not all about screen size, it's not all about speed, it's not all about quad core, it's not all about everything that the latest handsets have coming out. But don't worry, because you'll be able to customize your device in the future and have it in lots of different colors. Brilliant. Needless to say, Google buying Motorola and Motorola being kept at arm's length, it doesn't really feel like it's done Motorola or Google any good, to be honest. Looks like several billion dollars spent for nothing. It'll be interesting to see how Google and Motorola sort this out over time. They do treat themselves as separate companies. There's a firewall between what Google's doing in the Android team and what Motorola are doing. Effectively, Motorola are treated just like HTC, Samsung, Sony or anyone else. But, you know, I think personally we really need to see Google using Motorola for an intended purpose, which is to produce the very best examples of Android devices we can find. Unfortunately, as it stands at the moment, there's not an awful lot in the Motorola to kind of make me think, yeah, that's the new super phone, that's going to be the best device ever made. Now, just quickly having a look at this game that's up on screen at the moment, Bubble Age. If anyone remembers Puzzle Bobble, then this is kind of a game you're going to want to pick up. Really, really simple game, but wonderfully complicated as things go along. So the idea is to burst as many bubbles as you can. Once you manage to burst the required number for the level completes, you get bonus points, etc, etc, move on to the next level. But it's wonderfully executed and the graphics are just fantastic for this style of game. But let's now take a look at another title, which I did do a review for the other day, but unfortunately I made a mistake with the upload. This is called Respawnables, and effectively it's a third-person multiplayer shooter, and the idea is, well, kill your opponents. Simple as that, really. Score points for your team, level up, unlock new guns, new armour, etc., and generally have a good time. The graphics are absolutely top-notch for a title of this sort. It's got a real kind of Gears of War thing going on, but with a cell shader style animation, and it just looks fantastic. Now, just excuse me for one moment, because I'm just going to quickly fix my green screen here. It's decided to have a little bit of a problem. Technical problems, always good fun, aren't they? Come on. No, you appear to be making things worse here. Hang on one moment. Let me pop some lights on. Knew I'd forgotten something this morning. There we go. Should be quite a bit better. There we are. Less spill and more cat. So, with Respawnables, it's very much a title about killing your opponent. No blood and gore in this particular game, just great fun cartoony style graphics. The gameplay is good. There are a few issues around how the game does its matchmaking. Unfortunately, it has a habit of putting newbie players in with the latest, the higher level players, who happen to be rocking the best gear and the best guns, and it can lead to a circumstance where, well, you basically die very quickly. One of the things I found really cool with this game, though, is all of the unlocks that they've got. As you'll see in a moment, the gun unlocks as you actually progress are really, really cool, including some stuff that appears to have kind of been licensed for inclusion in the game, which just, it's fantastic. Tinky, not upside down cat. But here you go, here's some of the great games. Just missed that, unfortunately. But basically, there's a Ghostbusters Proton pack available as well, which I just thought was fantastic. who doesn't want to run around killing people with a proton pack? I mean, it's just such geekiness. Another game I spent quite a bit of time with this week is Save the Snail. It's an Angry Birds style puzzle game. So the idea is that you have to complete the various challenges on each level, which involve saving your snail. You'll have to drop various items which are used to protect the snail or trigger traps and so on that will move your snail to safety. The whole gameplay is done beautifully. It's quite a simple game, but it becomes very challenging later on, which is exactly what you want. Now, another title I spent quite a bit of time with this week was Stay Alight. This one is one of those titles that comes along and you kind of think to yourself, wow, the developers have spent a lot of time and love getting this game not only looking great, but playing really well. So it's a puzzler, and the idea is you're a kind of strange light bulb guy, and there's these alien slimy things, and you're going to have to throw your light balls, as it were, to destroy the alien creature things and complete the level. And it's all based around physics, so it's very similar to the way Angry Birds does its thing. Each time you complete a level, you move on to the next one, you score stars effectively, which show you how well you've done. But the gameplay is just really nice, and also the graphics are, well, pretty unique actually. I've not seen graphics that look this kind of have this style to them before in a mobile title or anything else. It's kind of a very, very high quality artwork that really just makes the game have so much personality and, you know, a unique style. It's just fantastic. Another title I spent quite a bit of time on this week, or last week in fact, was Prince of Persia: The Shadow and the Flame. If you've played any Prince of Persia games, welcome back basically. It's Prince of Persia updated for a modern age, for modern devices and so on. Unlike the previous Prince of Persia title, which was very much a remake, this one is an all-new story. They've added some new gameplay mechanics, improved the combat and so on. It's still a little tricky in places, and it can trip you up when you actually think you're about to make a jump and you don't make it purely because you weren't close enough to the edge of the ledge or you didn't time it quite right. And it breaks your flow a little bit. There's a good example of that there. But overall, the graphics are just fantastic, and it's one of those titles where you kind of think to yourself, this shows kind of where Android and online games, mobile games will be going over the next year or so. Fantastic graphics, and just really, really good gameplay. Apart from some of these moments like that where you can easily mess up or not quite time it right. Now, a title that we'll be taking a look at later on in the week is WC Genesis, which is kind of a more basic third-person shooter. Not quite as nice graphics as Respawnables, but the gameplay is actually pretty good. The mobs tend to be bullet sponges, I found. Aim for the head would be my advice and keep moving. But overall, a really good effort from this game's developer to create something that's just a good, fun shooter experience, basically. Like I say, the graphics are not the best around, but that means that this game is going to work on a much wider range of Android devices. Certainly I'd say that any device over the last 2 years is going to play this game absolutely fine. Now, another title that I spent some time with was Blastron. If you play Worms games, if you've ever played a Worms game, then this is going to be of interest to you. It's a multiplayer Worms title. I know Worms has done multiplayer before, but it's nice to have a kind of new skin on things, as it were, and new weapons. It keeps the over-the-top Worm-style gameplay, so lots of crazy, crazy weapons in which to destroy your opponents with, but at all times, it just is a fun game. And the multiplayer works really well on an Android device. It's not too laggy or glitchy, obviously because of this turn-based style of gameplay it has going on, much easier to do on mobile, and using 3G connections, etc., but works absolutely flawlessly and really good fun. Now, a title that I know quite a few of you are interested in seeing a review from one or the other, is The Walking Dead. And this is a game where normally with TV shows and movie tie-ins, I tend to roll my eyes and go, ugh, what an awful attempt to capture what that medium was about, that movie, that TV show. With The Walking Dead, they've cracked it. It's absolutely brilliant. So the idea is it's a top-down strategy game of sorts, where you have to move Rick around these various environments, and it kind of follows the progression of the first series. So you have to escape from the hospital, and basically you have a circle of influence, as it were, and any zombies that move into that circle of influence, and if you're pointing the right way, you'll start attacking them, and the shooting's automatic. You'll have to pick up ammunition, health packs, and all sorts of other elements, as well as charging up your special attack to allow you to obviously survive as long as possible. A lot of the kind of tropes from the TV show and from zombie movies in general are included here, including things like the setting off the car alarms to attract the zombies, and it's just beautifully executed. Even though the graphics kind of like feel like Flash game plus a little bit more, it works brilliantly, and especially on a large format tablet as well, 7-inch tablets and above, it just works beautifully well. The graphics, this grey cell shader style of animation, as a mouthful for you, works great, and it really does add something quite unique, I think, to the game and to gameplay in general. It just screams quality in a way that we don't really get from most TV or movie tie-ins usually. But anyway, let's go on to the LG G2, because this device has caught a lot of people's attention. Now, specifically for this particular one, LG have kind of upped the ante substantially, really, against their competitors. If you're not aware, LG is not exactly one of the top flight companies we would consider when we look at mobile phones. You might consider them in the mid-tier, really. And so when they release a device that basically, on paper at least, blows the competition out of the water, well worth taking a look at. So the G2 is going to be rocking a 2.3 GHz Snapdragon 800 processor with an Adreno 330 GPU backing it up for your graphics. Now, just listen to that again, a 2.3 GHz mobile processor sitting in our smartphones. And that's something pretty special. We know the Snapdragon 800 is an incredibly powerful chip anyway, but seeing any processor in a mobile device clocked at 2.3 GHz, that's got to pique people's interest. Now, it's only backed up with 2 GB of RAM, which is a slightly odd one, because given the overall spec they've got there with the graphics, with the CPU and GPU, probably would have expected to see 3 GB of RAM in there. But never mind, if you look across the specs of other devices out there, 2 GB of RAM is pretty much the standard this year. Note 3, widely rumoured to be going to 3 GB, and we'll see what kind of difference that makes. Now, also with the LG G2, they've gone for a 5.2-inch screen, and they've gone for IPS LCD. Now, they're saying that the IPS LCD screens, which they're calling full HD screens because they're not pentile, so they're not using subpixels, etc., or robbing a subpixel in, I think it's blue or green with Samsung's devices. I can never quite remember. I think they've switched it round a few times on the AMOLED screens. But in essence, there's nothing being robbed from the LG G2 screen, and when they've shown it in their demonstrations, it certainly appears that you're going to have a greater level of definition on the screen than you would normally get with, say, Galaxy S4. Now, they're quoting 4.24 pixels per inch, 424 pixels per inch on a 1920 1080 display. Now again, if you pop that against the Galaxy S4, which is using a Super AMOLED screen with pentile, Samsung are actually achieving 441 pixels per inch. But LG are adamant that the pixel per inch count, it kind of doesn't matter if you're actually robbing away from some of those subpixels. So if you're kind of substituting some pixels for subpixels and then you're removing one of those colours, you're not really hitting 444 pixels per inch. You're actually hitting something a little bit less, depending on how many subpixels you've changed out. In this particular case, I don't think it's going to make that much of a difference to real world situations. I think a lot of it's going to come down to the colour reproduction more than anything else. The clarity on screen, human eyes being what they are, you know, we're kind of reaching the upper point, really, I think, of what is perceivable. However, things like colour saturation, colour reproduction, and the dynamics of those colours, we would expect the IPS LCD screen to provide a much more natural feel to it. Now, the other interesting area is the battery. They've gone for a 3000 milliamp hour battery in here, which is phenomenally large, actually. If you look around for another device which has a similar size battery in it, you'd be looking at the Sony Xperia Z Ultra, which is a 6.44 inch screen. I mean, it's massive. Do you know? It's like a Note Plus. So to have a battery of that size running in there, obviously we would expect good battery life. However, traded off against running a processor at 2.3 gigahertz, it's going to be very interesting to see what that means in real terms. Now, it's coming with 16 gig or 32 gig of storage. Hooray! Choice at launch, unlike Samsung, who only offer the 16 gig to begin with. And it's also got the infrared blaster built in as well. Now, it's not water resistant, but as we've seen with some other devices, claiming water resistance and actually delivering water resistance, two totally different things. Are you having fun there, Kat? Now, the camera is actually quite an interesting thing on the LG G2. The reason for that is it's a 13 megapixel sensor. Now, that's by the by, let's face it, megapixel count means very little. But what they have done with this particular device is put in an optical image stabilizer. And they're claiming a first for a 13 megapixel shooter. Certainly if we look at the others on the market, the Samsung, it does not have image stabilization. And OIS does make a massive difference to picture quality. I cannot stress this enough. So if you have a camera with image stabilization in there, not only does it mean that you're more likely to take the great picture first time without any judder or shake, but it also means in low light conditions, the camera is going to have a better time of analyzing the frames and working out exactly how much exposure is going to be needed and compensation to get a great shot in low light as well. It does make a massive difference. If you're someone who's used a digital SLR camera with an image stabilized lens, or if you've used some of the older smartphones which included image stabilization, you'll know what I mean. It makes a massive, massive difference. Now, coming to the market with Android 4.2.2, so you're not getting 4.3 in here, and I don't recall seeing anything that said when we might likely see 4.3 on this device. So we'll just have to wait and see, but I will be very surprised if it doesn't receive 4.3 and Keyline Pi when that launches later on in the year. Overall, on paper at least, the LG G2 looks like an absolutely stonking piece of kit, possibly one of the best released this year. What we'll have to do is really see how that holds up in real world tests. They've got a few interesting software tweaks that they've made as well on this device, as well as a really interesting hardware concept as well, which is known as graphics RAM or display RAM. Now, this particular technology really caught my attention because the way it works is very similar to how e-ink displays work. So if you imagine that our smartphones have to display a picture on the screen 60 times every second. Now here's the problem. Most of the time, unless you're playing a game, the screen doesn't actually need to show a new image 60 times every second. It actually might only need to show an updated image once every second, or maybe once every 5 minutes if you happen to be reading an ebook or just looking at an image on the screen that is static. We spend, or waste should I say, an awful lot of processing power, which ultimately is battery, just updating the screen unnecessarily. Now what LG have done is they've added a small amount of graphics RAM onto their display. It sits effectively between the logic board and the display. And what it does is every time a new frame is sent to that graphics RAM, it checks. And it says, well, hang on a second, if this frame hasn't actually changed since the previous time, why do I need to keep updating and having the CPU updating all of this information? If what I can actually do is just keep displaying this same frame over and over again from my buffer. Now that buffer is a lot cheaper from a cost of view of CPU resources and battery life than anything you would get from updating the screen 60 times every second. Now LG have worked out in their tests that this will give them a 10% battery advantage. So again, taking into account what they've done with the larger battery and offsetting against the more powerful processor, are we going to see 10% better battery life versus other devices on the market, HTC One, Galaxy S4, or will it kind of just be buying back some of that battery life that is being robbed from a much more powerful processor? It's going to be really interesting to see how this works in real terms, but also if there's any drop or perceivable loss of quality of holding that image on the screen. Like I say, this is something that's been done quite a lot with e-ink displays, where effectively when you when you're looking at a page, that is buffered up and locked to the screen with obviously still an electrical charge going, but you don't need to do all all of the updating and so on, which usually involves a small amount of animation, transitions, etc. If you already know the image is there, why keep asking the CPU and the GPU to keep rendering something that hasn't changed? It's a great idea, and I honestly think we'll probably see this technology dropping down into other manufacturers' devices probably over the next 18 months to 2 years, if it works as well as LG claim it does. And that's ultimately going to be the real test. If this works, then we found another way to save battery life or offset some of the extra processing power that we eat up effectively with our devices. Like I say, it's not going to work for games where you really do need those displays updating really, really quickly. But ebooks, browsing the web, looking at photographs, etc. Anything where the image is going to be static even for half a second could provide an extra boost for battery, because effectively for that extra half a second, for those 30 frames, the system is just going to go, well, I'm not going to keep updating myself. Why bother? It's just a waste of power. Now, one of the things that's quite interesting that you've just caught a quick glimpse of, this is LG's promo roll for their various innovations. They've taken the S-View cover concept from Samsung, this idea of having a front cover that you can pop onto your device, and then interact with the device through the cover. And so there's effectively is an S-window style thing, and there we go. It shows your clock, it gives you access to widgets, etc. And it's all done very similar to the S-View. What I thought was much more interesting with this device, though, is it's a bigger window. The one thing I couldn't understand with Samsung is why put on this tiny little bar effectively there, which actually doesn't provide that much information. And any information that does go in there has to be quite cramped up, which LG have obviously looked at and thought to themselves, well, let's just make it bigger. Maybe not make it as long, but make it at least twice the depth, effectively, twice the height of the S-View cover. And in doing so, you get more functionality. You're not squinting at the screen. You're not going like this every time you want to, read something through the S-View cover. For my mind, that's the actual way to do it, as it were, and I think LG have got a bit of a winner there. One thing that will be interesting is whether we see the same problems with LG's cover as we saw with the Samsung cover, which is where the actual spine isn't really very well manufactured, I suppose you could say, and effectively the cover keeps popping open when it's in your pocket. You would think if you have a little magnet there that's designed for turning the screen on or off, when you open the cover, you would hope that same little magnet could be used just to give a little bit of pressure of some sort, just suck that cover directly to the top of the device, but sadly no. So it'll be interesting to see what LG do on this one, and so whether they resolve that issue or whether it's a case of lots of bending of the spine until you get something that lies as flat as possible. For my mind, a lot of these covers, especially ones that replace these back plates, they just don't work very well where they have a spine. They're too prone to falling open, unfortunately, and in some cases I've seen devices get scratched purely because the cover lifted up slightly and a coin slid down the inside, got trapped under the cover, rattle rattle, nice scratches on your screen. Didn't happen to me, it did happen to someone I know. So with the LG G2, it's certainly going to be a device we're going to be watching over the next 3 or 4 weeks or so. It'll be interesting to see how it stacks up in reviews, and we'll certainly be trying to lay our hands on one to bring you a fuller picture. So let's have a final look at a couple of games I have kicking around on here. One game that I was quite surprised didn't get quite the attention I thought it would on the channel is Boom Boom Hamster Golf. Possibly a controversial title in the sense that you're firing hamsters out of a cannon, but as a twist on the way golf games operate, it's fantastic, because let's face it, Tiger Woods, if you've played Tiger Woods once, you have played every version of Tiger Woods they have ever brought out since. It just has new graphics and some updated courses. So to have something that kind of reimagines the concept of golf and does it in such a wonderfully cute style as well is just fantastic. You really can't get much better as a kind of alternative golf game than this. And putting is just as hard with a hamster as it is with a real ball. It does take some practice and skill. So I really hope you've enjoyed Androidizen Live episode 4. Do let me know in the comments if you have anything you'd like to say, or any feedback, or if you have any questions. So do keep watching. I'd also suggest grab our Android app as well. It's available free on the Google Play Store. Subscribe if you're not already subscribed, and do tune in again next week, and keep checking the channel because we have new uploads every single day. Just hope you've enjoyed Androidizen Live episode 4, and we'll see you again soon.